My name's Sam, and I'm from Fairy Godboss. If you didn't already know, Fairy Godboss is the largest career community for women. Our platform supports women throughout their careers with free resources like company reviews, job listings, webinars with various experts like Courtney herself, virtual recruiting events, and a community where users can be honest about their triumphs and failures, either as themselves or anonymously. So welcome to our latest installment of our Discovery series. Before we get started, we will be recording today's webinar and sending it out in an email following. So if you miss anything or you want to rewatch it, you'll have the chance to do so. Also, we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, so if you have any, please feel free to leave them either in the chat or at the Q&A. Both are featured at the bottom of your screen, and with the Q&A, you can leave questions with your username or anonymously. You have the chance to do with both. So here with me today to talk about all things physical security is Courtney. Courtney is currently a security consultant at T&M Protection Resources, specializing in physical and operational security for cultural properties, educational institutions, and high-risk organizations. Prior to joining T&M, Courtney was the Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which has given her a unique perspective into the threat landscape facing her client organizations. Having hands-on experience in two vastly different aspects of security and protection have allowed Courtney opportunities to innovate across multiple client projects, and she consistently looks forward to helping to carve out a pathway for young women in the security field. Thanks for being with me today, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into physical security? How did you find out about it, and what was your journey there?
So it was actually like a lot of things throughout my career. I kind of fell into it unexpectedly. I grew up in the Southwest and didn't really know that physical security was something that you could do as a job. This was back, not too long ago, but long enough ago that people weren't as worried about, terrorism and violent attacks at the workplace. So where I grew up, we barely even had security officers. After I moved to New York, one of the most striking things for me was the number of security officers that were just kind of ubiquitous throughout the city, at Target, at libraries, at all the schools. This wasn't something I was used to, so it never occurred to me that this was really a career field that I could pursue. I moved to New York specifically to study criminal justice, and throughout the course of my master's program in criminal justice with a focus in victimology, I got invited to join an internship program where the professor who was running it taught us different aspects of physical security. The whole idea behind the program was to be able to provide nonprofits, schools, religious institutions, that kind of thing, with the ability to get money for a DHS grant that is specifically geared towards helping people protect themselves against potential acts of terrorism. So I really enjoyed everything that we learned, everything, but just the theory behind it, the idea of everything that we could do was great. When I graduated, I remember sitting at the part-time job that I had doing very interesting research, but thinking to myself, academia is great and all, but I wish I could make that a real job. I wish that was something that I could do. And lo and behold, a couple weeks later, the individual who ran the program actually sent out an email to the graduates and said, hey, I've got a job that's, I'm looking to hire 2 new people. It's out in New Jersey. So if you're interested, go ahead, send over your resume and we'll see what works. So I sent my resume over, he brought me on, and I was wildly elated to figure out that this was actually a viable career field.
Awesome. So now, what do you actually do today? What is physical security? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
So it's difficult to really pinpoint what things specifically go on as part of physical security. The easiest way to explain it is making sure that there are physical and technological structures in place to protect people wherever they are, whether that's a security system at home or turnstiles in the workplace. That's really the essence of physical security, but in more recent years, it's also blossomed into operational security. How do you deploy your security guards to make sure that people are going to know that they're there and they're going to feel protected? How do you educate your workforce to help them understand why do I have to wear my ID badge? I work with everybody here. Like, what's the point in my ID badge? How can you train students, for example, from very young students to high school students, college students, to include their teachers and the staff at the school or wherever they may be, to respond effectively in cases of on-site violence, whether that's an active shooter or a fight in the schoolyard. So physical security, really the goal is to keep people physically safe and fit wherever they are.
Got it. And so then what kind of skills are you utilizing all of the time? Like, what are your top skills that you need to work in your job?
The one skill that, in my opinion, cannot be taught necessarily to somebody who wishes to pursue a career in physical security, or to anybody, quite frankly, is just a general sense of constant awareness and being able to look at a number of things at once and be able to deconstruct them quickly. So if you walk into a lobby somewhere, it's very easy to get distracted by like, oh, this is a beautiful security desk, those are really nice plants, you have really pretty doors, like it's just pleasant to be here, it smells nice, you got cool music playing or whatever. But while paying attention to sort of the overall structure, you also have to be able to focus on, is that camera placed properly? Are these turnstiles going to allow for enough emergency egress? Are the ADA compliant? So just being able to tick off a bunch of things in your mind to help you understand, like, is this an effective, holistic approach to physical security? Beyond that, really a lot of the stuff that security professionals use, physical security professionals use, can kind of just be picked up as time goes on. What's the difference between an optical turnstile and physical turnstile? What's the point? What's the point of putting your HID pad reader right here instead of right here? So it's a lot of very minute technical skills, being able to bring them all together. But those are all things that can be very, very easily learned, and a lot of people, quite honestly, learn on the fly, either in their training or you show up at a site, whether it's whether you're a consultant like me or it's a site that you're working to in a dedicated fashion, and you kind of look at something and go, that's not right, gonna have to do some research, figure out what it is, because it's such a dynamic field, things are changing all the time. You have to be able to admit when you don't know something, and then also figure out where you can go to get that information.
Got it. And now you said you're kind of a consultant. So are you specializing in very specific types of buildings and securities? You only do jails or schools or something? Or is it, if you work in physical security, you're a master of all?
So it kind of depends. I would say that people who spend their entire career in corporate security, working for a dedicated either building or company, it kind of goes back and forth, especially in places like New York, where you have multi-tenant buildings all over the place. They're more likely to specialize in a specific kind of thing, whether that's school security is going to be fairly different from a typical office space, but also shockingly similar to hospital security. So I think people tend to specialize based just off of what they're comfortable with, but the skills are generally very transferable. In the consulting field, we're sort of generalists in that respect. We can't necessarily say, oh, that's great. It's, you're a multi-campus hospital organization, but we don't do that because as consultants, can't just keep turning people down all willy-nilly, doesn't make money. And while our primary goal, of course, is to keep people safe and to assist our client organizations, we can't keep doing that without having some form of revenue.
That makes sense. So I know we've kind of talked about this before, but you once said to me that you're one of like 5 women who work in this industry. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So that's probably a little hyperbolic. There are more than 5 of us, but it is a very, very small number of women in this industry. A lot of this is very quickly changing as the industry kind of becomes younger. But a lot of people in physical security are retired law enforcement. So just by nature of the law enforcement culture, a lot of people who come out, they're not women. There, of course, are female police officers, female first responders, but just generally speaking, it's a very small population. And then on top of that, people under the age of 50 in corporate security are also a very, very small population. So it's difficult for a lot of women to get into this field, especially on the physical side. Another aspect to corporate security beyond cybersecurity, which everyone's very aware of, and it's very, very important, but there's a sort of silent side of the corporate security world that is the intelligence side. And that is very, very heavily populated with women and females and young women in particular, just because it's fun. I did it for years for Planned Parenthood. It's very interesting, and it's easy to gain respect as a woman in that field. But on the physical side, I wouldn't say that the overwhelming majority of older men in particular in the field are necessarily disrespectful, but having a 25, 30-year-old woman come and tell you like, oh yeah, you changed all this stuff, where what are you talking about? I did 20 years as a police officer. I don't need you talking to me. So it's definitely, it is changing. It's very slowly changing. At my company in particular, we are very unique in that we have a lot of women, not only in the workforce. My team, we're a very small team. We're 5 people and 2 of us are women. So we're almost halfway there. But at TNM in particular, we have a lot of women in leadership roles, and that is exceedingly unique for a security consulting company.
Got it. So now, trying to get more women into the workforce, what's your favorite part about what you do? And kind of why is this a great career option for women? And this could be anything from something you really just like about your job to maybe it's incredible pay or really flexible hours, anything like that.
So I'd say my personal favorite aspect of it, this is going to sound really stupid, but it's very honest. I just like going to buildings and seeing them. It's very fun to kind of see the different way that things are set up, that things are organized. I personally really enjoy going into like the bowels of a building and then also to the roof. It's something that a lot of people don't get to see. But something I think a lot of women, especially younger women, would appreciate is that working in corporate security, and then particularly as a consultant within corporate security, you have to really be able to understand the culture of an organization. You can't walk into a company like Planned Parenthood and offer them the exact same ideas as if you were to walk into, say, Citibank. They're very different corporate cultures, and I think that as women in general, that's something that we're very good at intuitively understanding and being able to speak to it. As far as security consulting in general, I do think it's very, very dynamic. A lot of companies are very good at understanding, sometimes it's important to give someone the option to work from home. It's very important to keep around good talent who is able to really foment trust with the client base. And because of that, the pay can, after a couple years, get very rewarding. But it's also very flexible because of the sort of civil servant mentality of a lot of the supervisors, bosses, for lack of a better word. They're often very understanding if you have children, for example, saying, hey, I got to leave early, kid's got a baseball game. They're usually very, very good about that. So for working mothers, I think it's useful to have that flexibility, but it's also great because it's a good way to help your children understand that there is more out there than the typical, firefighter, doctor kind of careers. And full disclosure, I don't have children, but I've spoken to a lot of women in this field who have said that they're always very proud to tell their kids, tell, those soccer moms or whomever, tell their spouses, friends what they do, because they can take real honest pride in it.
Awesome. So, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but you came to your job because, you were interested in the academia, and then the job opening was just boom in your inbox right there. But what can somebody do if they're kind of interested in the field, but you don't know if they want to jump right into it? Where can they go to learn more about this? This isn't something they'll teach you in 6th grade typically, but where can people go to learn more?
So there are a couple of professional organizations you can look into that really, they do some level of training. It's generally a little bit expensive and it takes a lot of studying, but if you're just interested in learning more kind of what's out there, what type of verticals can, security professional work in, I would recommend the ASIS webpage. It is kind of the prototypical leader in the security industry across the globe. You'll be able to see like kind of what people do, their interviews with folks. They have a security management magazine that talks about the most up-to-date technology issues that are coming forward. You could always look into organizations like ATAP, the Association for Threat Assessment Professionals. Very much the same thing, just more focused on doing the actual threat assessment rather than standing up a security model. And I mean, quite honestly, your best bet would be to volunteer somewhere. I've been trying to do that a lot myself. I have a personal interest in security at museums, and volunteering somewhere, finding their security director, or quite frequently whoever got stuck doing security. Honestly, it's very often not a security professional. And then just talking to them about it. What do you do? Could I shadow you? Is there a way that I could, is there anything you need that I can help with? And that's also often, if you find that you like it, a very good way to sort of shoehorn yourself into a career. Because like a lot of things nowadays in the professional worlds, it's very much about who you know as well as what you know, but the more contacts you can have, if it's something that you have decided you're interested in, you want to move forward with, that's a very, very good way to get started.
Cool. And so to everybody listening in, I have a few more questions, but I don't want to hog Courtney's time. So if you have any questions yourself, feel free to leave them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll make sure we get to them. But I had another question about, so you said it kind of seems like a lot of communication skills are really necessary for this job. Who exactly are you working with when you go to all these different places? You said museums and banks. Who's kind of like the person you're talking to and making your suggestions and adjustments with?
So there's really no single answer for that. It's very dependent on the client, on the problem, on the question. For example, one of my supervisors and I recently did an emergency plan review for one of the love apps. That's their preferred terminology. They don't like dating apps. And there we were actually working with their head of facilities to go through and talk about, if there is this kind of issue, if there's a hurricane, if there's a tornado, if there's an earthquake, what are you going to do? Do you have the tools to prepare? How are you going to evacuate? If there's an active shooter, what are you going to do? So in that situation, it made a lot more sense to work with the facilities director. Oftentimes when I go to schools, we're working with the principal, sometime with their security director if they have one, the head of school, kind of whoever is chief on top. At banks, it's very frequently with their security director. That's one thing that I actually very much enjoy working with security professionals as a client, because they are able to leverage us sort of as tools to get what they want. Everyone kind of knows what they need, but for some reason it's a lot easier to have someone from the outside come in and tell you, what the in-house security person has been saying for a long time. So it depends on the project that's going on, kind of the structure of the organization, the way that they're set up, the culture there. Sometimes the CEO only wants to talk to you. You have to go through them to get to anyone else. Sometimes you're not allowed to talk to anybody more senior than the guy at the front desk who started 2 days ago.
Got it. And then it seems like this is a very much ever-changing position. I mean, the world of, as we know, it is changing every single day. So how are you keeping up to date on kind of new security measures and things like that? Is your company actively training you, or do you have to go and seek out these new trainings yourself?
So TNM personally is very, very good at keeping us up to date. They like to send us to lots and lots of conferences. We have subscriptions to all the major security publications, as well as news organizations. We have the paid subscriptions, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all that stuff. And when we have downtime, we're very encouraged to either catch up on that or to pick up a book, read up on something that interests us, whether that's terrorism or security technology, whatever it may be. Most security companies will host lunch and learns. We'll have a representative from a tech company come in and kind of display, here's all the stuff, or we'll be contacted by companies, especially software companies, doing stuff like visitor management, employee management, where they'll come in and kind of tell us what they do specifically and also what's available in their field as a whole.
Got it. Looks like we had a question come in from our listeners. So this person asked, how often do you work on hardened facilities like nuclear power plants?
So personally, not often. That is largely because I do have a specialty in schools and cultural property. So I really enjoy going to museums and getting to touch all their stuff and break their systems. So I like to consider them hardened, but they're really not. Within the industry, there are definitely specialists who spend a lot of time working on hardened locations, military installations. My company, I know we've previously done water installations, whether it's purification plants, that kind of thing. But that really is typically a very specialized thing, just because they're not just going to let anybody walk in to an embassy and start telling them how to run their security. You're going to have clearance. You're going to have background checks. So it's certainly something that people do either as security consultants or in corporate security in general, but is very much a niche aspect of it.
As far as specializations go, is that something you have to decide when you're doing your degree and start studying it then? Or can you go to a company and say, I want to specialize in this, teach me?
I would say, so no, you don't have to decide from the beginning. I'd say the way it usually works is actually by happenstance. I have a colleague who very unwillingly is specialized in high-rise facilities. And that's just because he was previously in NYPD counterterrorism and did that kind of work there. And so he already came in with the knowledge base just because of what he had been doing. And now it's sort of, that's where he goes. When we get this kind of project, that's what happens. You can also choose your specialty like I did. I just have a personal interest in cultural property, and I went to my supervisor and I said, I want to go to this conference. I want to get this certification. I want to be put on these clients of ours that are part and parcel of with cultural property protection. So it's kind of whatever you want. You can choose, you can be forced to, you can just fall into it.
Got it. We've had some questions come in about cybersecurity. So how does physical security tie in with cybersecurity? And will learning more about the physical side help me break into this cybersecurity realm? So
physical security and cybersecurity are, of course, very different, but I like to think of them as very much dependent on one another. Physical security protects cybersecurity infrastructure, for example. There have been numerous times that I have gone into IDFs, MDFs, and haven't had to badge in, haven't needed to be escorted, which is clearly problematic if it's just something that's standing up an entire company's network. Sometimes when you get inside, you see that there's all sorts of fantastic technology, but none of it is actually intended to protect the very important technology. So physical security can be used to make sure cybersecurity can keep doing what it needs to do. On the flip side, a lot of physical security now really exists in the realm of cybersecurity. We have systems, we have technology, we have wireless, we have Wi-Fi, we have all this stuff that helps run our items, our devices, and we can't do that without it being properly protected. So for the last part of that question, I do think that learning more about physical security is useful for cybersecurity professionals. I'm not necessarily certain it would help you break into the field, but if you have that level of knowledge, once you do get a foot in the door, you will be unique in that aspect and understanding sort of why it's important to lock up cabinets, for example, the best type of cabinets, whether you should do biometric or mechanical or something in between. That's going to really give you a value that a lot of cybersecurity professionals don't presently have.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to put in a last call for questions. I know we have a few more, but if you have any that you're waiting to ask, please ask them now. Sherry wants to know, again, touching on cybersecurity, what does that landscape look like? And are there many women in that industry? I mean, as you said, they're pretty separate, similar but separate. So what does that one look like?
I can't say for sure since I'm not a cybersecurity professional. However, I do know that within that field, there are a lot of groups that are very focused on promoting women and their benefit in cybersecurity. There is a conceited effort to actually get women into cybersecurity. I have met more women in cybersecurity than in physical security, so I would assume that means that it is certainly not 50-50 split, no gender parity there, but they have to be more represented, just based on my personal experience and how many organizations are so dedicated to expanding women in the field.
Mm-hmm. That's something we've seen on the Fairy God Boss side as well. Honestly, it's just this push to get women into the cyber world. Cool. So thank you, Sherry, for that question. And I don't see any more coming through. So I just want to ask, do you have any final kind of words of wisdom for women who are maybe interested in physical security? Anything you can impart on them?
I guess my big thing would just be, don't be afraid to play with the boys. It's, a little bit weird going into the office and essentially, sparring with your grandpa on something that you really think is important to protect people. But for the most part, despite the fact that they're older men, they're a little bit scary. I really have felt like every single supervisor I've ever had has been my grandfather, but they're very nice, and most of them are very dedicated to making sure that young professionals are able to achieve a good level in their career, especially because they're all very aware that we're going to be replacing them soon. You got to retire at some point. And also know that physical security is a very dynamic field. It's very interesting. You get to learn a lot. And whether you choose to go into it intentionally, whether you fall into it like some of us, or if you choose to stay in it full term, go somewhere else, the communication skills and the ability to really think on a much more complicated level is something that's very, very transferable to other jobs, to other career fields, and just to life in general.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you, everybody who joined in today. As a reminder, we're sending this out in an email, so look out for it. We'll also be including a great article featuring a lot of Courtney's advice in there, so you can take a read through it, look for some of those resources she mentioned, and find out more info there. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Courtney, and I hope everybody has a great day.